My neighbor is a murderer and now I can finally prove it. I moved into this house about 4 years ago. It's a small town in the middle of nowhere, Indiana. My apartment complex has 8 identical townhomes and they look identical. If you've ever played The Sims, it's almost like he copy and pasted every single house. Now, I loved my apartment. I was borderline obsessed with it. And it wasn't an insanely nice place or anything, but it was perfect for me. Now, on the day I was moving in, some of the neighbors came out and started greeting me. Just like a nice neighborly welcome. My mom had come with me to help me unpack, and she asked one of the girls, "Do you like living here?" Which I feel like a little late to ask that, mom, but okay. The girl responded and said everyone was pretty normal, it was nice, and it was quiet, except this one neighbor, who of course happened to be my next door neighbor. He rarely came out of his apartment ever, she said, and he always kept his blinds down. But at first I found that I liked my neighbor. He was quiet, he kept to himself, and he didn't cause any problems. But the neighbor across the street was a whole nother story. Like I said, all of these houses were like Sims houses, copy and pasted. My front window where I could see out and wash my dishes from my sink faced someone else's front window where they would wash dishes from their sink. Now, I had met the guy across the street on the first day when I moved in. He seemed nice enough, even borderline charming. Now, I'm not saying I creeped on my neighbor, but I kind of creeped on my neighbor. So I started to recognize his routine based on when his light was on in his kitchen window, which I guess sounds creepy when I say it out loud. Anyways, his light was always off during the day and then on during odd hours at night, like 1 a.m., 4 a.m., 3 a.m. And I'm a night owl myself, so I always noticed when it popped on. But I always joked that this guy could have been a vampire or something because only his kitchen light was ever on. Every other light was always off. It started to become an ongoing joke of me and my friends guessing what he did for a living because he was never out. I never saw anyone come and go from his house. And I mean, like, ever. One of my friends was like, "He's clearly a serial killer." And I'm like, haha, very funny. But then things started to take a really weird turn. After living there for about 8 months, I finally saw him. Well, the other night it was really nice out, so I decided to sit outside on my porch, which is honestly not something I do often. I did have my dog outside sitting with me, so I felt a little bit safer. But it was a quiet night. It was a full moon, and then my dog started growling, but I wasn't sure what he was growling at. And then I hear a voice say, "I didn't know you had a dog." To which I look over and it's the cross the street neighbor. I was just in shock. I couldn't say anything immediately. So then he says, "So what are you doing out?" Pause. Was this man watching me as much as I was watching him? Could he really be a vampire or a serial killer? I'm honestly not sure which would be worse. Then he just left and went back to his house. Twice I've seen this man in what, 9 months? So then my friend suggested that I Google him. And everything's online these days. When I tell you me and my friends can find anyone on social media, I mean anyone. We could not find this man. So the group chat started speculating, could this man actually be a serial killer? Is he on the run? And boy, did we find our answers. If you guys saw my last video, you know my neighbor is a serial killer. The last thing I told you is we could not find this man on social media. So me and my friends started doing surveillance. And I started to notice him at night more frequently. And I even saw what kind of car he drove, which was a black van. Perfect for putting bodies in. And then I noticed on trash days, instead of bringing trash out, he was bringing big bags of something inside. Like, I don't know, bones, body parts. I knew it was only a matter of time before I caught him red-handed. And then a few nights ago, I saw him. And he wasn't alone. He had come home at 2 a.m. and a girl got out of his passenger seat. Now I know what you're thinking. Charming young man brings a girl home. Totally normal. Totally normal. But he never turned any of his lights on in his home. And I never saw the girl leave. I did only stay up like an hour after because I got tired and I decided to go to bed. But it's not like she would leave at like 3 a.m. So I got up at 6 a.m. and I didn't see her leave the whole day. And this wasn't the first or last girl to show up at his house. But I never saw any of them leave. He'd also bring weird tools into his house, like shovels. Who needs more than one shovel? All I know is I'm pretty sure one night he saw me watching him. And the next day, a moving truck was sitting in front of his house and he moved away. I still don't know this guy's name. He doesn't have any social media. He could be America's most wanted.
This is why you should be careful who you talk to online. When I was 15 and getting into my junior year, I created a Twitter account. I didn't tell anyone my username, including my family or friends. I also didn't upload any pictures or specify my exact location, and I put a different city than where I lived. I had around 30 followers and I didn't follow many people. One evening in October, someone sent me a weird direct message. They had 200 followers and the message read, "Hi, I'm Robin. I just turned 17. I wanted to know if you lived in the city because I'm moving there and I'm going to that high school soon. I'd like to make some new friends." I immediately thought something was wrong because nowhere in my profile did I list my actual town, but I remembered a tweet I made a few few weeks ago about buses, in which I mentioned my city. I was bored and he was polite, so we started talking. The discussion was mainly about high school teachers and cafeteria food. As it got later in the night, he started asking more personal questions, like if I lived far from the school or if I was ever home alone. I never answered these questions because it was too shady for me. The next day we talked again and started bonding. We had a 2-week vacation in October, and at the end of it is when he finally told me that he would be attending my high school. I was so excited to finally meet him. Part 2 of why you should be careful who you talk to online. He asked to pick a place to meet during the morning break on our first day back to school after break. I was so happy to meet him and told him to join me in the hall. However, when he realized people would be around, he said he'd rather meet me in an isolated place because he might not recognize me in a crowd. It was a good enough excuse for me, and I told him to meet me in the 3rd floor bathroom because we weren't allowed to stay there during breaks and no one would disturb us. In my head, it seemed a little creepy, but since we were in school, I was confident that nothing bad could happen. I dressed up and made myself really pretty and counted down the minutes till we met. When he arrived, it was him. He wasn't a catfish, but he looked a little older than 17. We talked and got along so well, and at the end of it, he asked me to go to lunch with him. I refused because I didn't have money and wouldn't let anyone pay for me. He seemed disappointed but offered to walk me home after class. I told him I have to take the bus, but he could walk me there. This became a routine for another 2 months. One day, I complained about how lonely I'd be at home as everyone in my family was going to be out that day. I know it was reckless, but I thought I could trust him by this point. That evening, he walked me to the bus stop. I waved goodbye and put my headphones in. Little did I know that my life was in danger. Part 3 of why you should be careful who you talk to online. When I got off, I had a weird gut feeling that someone was watching me. Since it was December, it was already dark by the time that I had gotten off the bus. I paused my music but kept my earphones in not to draw suspicion. It was silent, and that's when I heard footsteps behind me. I knew someone was following me. As quietly as possible, I reached for my keys in my pocket. As soon as I pulled them out, I ran. It was the best and fastest sprint of my life. I somehow managed to open and close the door before he could reach me. I deactivated the alarm and looked through the glass panel on the door. It wasn't a peephole but a whole window, so if someone wanted to see inside the house, they could. Standing there looking at me with the creepiest face was Rob. He followed me home, probably with a car, and I was paralyzed. We stared at each other for a minute before I ran to the kitchen to grab a knife. When I got back to the door, he was still there and started banging. I feared the glass would break, but it didn't. After 5 minutes, he stopped and went around the house banging on every shutter until he came back to the door. He looked angry, but my neighbor's car pulled in and he ran off, probably thinking it was my family. After this, he harassed me online, which finally made me delete my Twitter. No one even knew or heard of him, which is probably why he looked older. I never heard of him again, but I still wonder what could have happened that night.
This is why you should always lock your front doors. A kid living with both of his parents decided to watch a movie for their family weekly movie night. He then gets up to use the restroom. As he is in the restroom, he sees all of the power in the house cuts off, and then he hears 2 loud thumps. He locks the bathroom door and hears heavy objects being dragged across the hallway. The kid, freaking out, runs out of the bathroom and runs into the restroom. Once he is inside the room, he locks the door. As he locks the door, he jumps in bed and acts like he's asleep in hopes that this person who is in the house will ignore a child sleeping. He closes his eyes and hears the door creak at the same time. He squints his eyes and sees a man with no eyes dragging the bodies of both of his parents. The man dragging his parents sits his mom's dead body in a chair facing him, and then sets the dad's body on the floor facing up. It was almost like whoever was in the house who killed them wanted him to see it. He then sees the man writing something on the wall and then climbs under his bed. He laid there for hours knowing that if he moved a muscle, he would end up just like his parents. He finally built up enough courage to read the wall, and the writing on the wall said, "I know you're awake."
This is why you should always trust your gut. In the 1970s, a young couple decided to go for a late-night hike in the woods. A couple minutes into their walk, and the man remembers thinking something's not right. He tells his girlfriend, but they just decide to ignore it and keep going, until he steps on something that felt really soft, like it was alive. Before he has a chance to see what he stepped on, they hear all this rustling in the bushes next to them, and they bolt. Years later, that couple turns on the TV, and a death row inmate who's about to be executed is being interviewed. And they ask him, was there ever a time that you were almost caught red-handed? He responded, yes, one time. I was in the woods, and a couple walked through, and the man actually stepped on the body of a girl I had just killed. I was hiding in the bushes just a few feet away. They didn't see me. That couple had run into one of the worst serial killers of all time, Ted Bundy.
There was a man in my bedroom window. Story time. So growing up, me and my brother were left alone a lot. My mom was a single lady raising 2 kids, so there were plenty of times where she had to work late. It never was an issue because on the days where my mom worked late, usually my mom had a babysitter for us, but as my brother got older, he started babysitting me. Which turned out to be a disaster because a lot of the time he would leave me home by myself. So one day I'm home alone because my brother was supposed to be watching me, but I guess he had other plans. I'm chilling in my bedroom playing video games and it's dark outside. Like if I looked out my window, I couldn't see a thing. And as I'm playing video games, my back is to the window. Now it was hot that day, so I had the window open. And you know that feeling you get when you're alone, but you feel like somebody is watching you? That's the feeling I had. And I wasn't paying attention to it until I heard something tap the window. I turn around to see where the noise is coming from, and I kid you not, it looked like somebody had just quickly ducked down so I wouldn't see them. So of course I'm scared because I wasn't sure if I actually saw somebody or if it was just my mind playing tricks on me. But somehow I mustered up the courage to walk over to the window and shut it. And keep in mind, I was only around 11 at this point, but I managed to calm myself down, convince myself it was all in my head, and I went back to playing video games. Also, my mom was coming home soon, so that made me feel a little bit better because I wasn't going to be home alone for too much longer. However, a couple minutes go by and I hear something tap on the window again. So of course I turn around again, but there's nothing there but darkness. But this time I sat and I stared at that window. I was not taking my eyes off. And even though all you could see was black, if you looked closely, you could kind of make out the figure of a man. So I sat there and I just kept staring because I felt like I could see somebody. And even though my heart was racing and I was terrified, I was just froze there, stuck. Now, I don't know if staring egged this figure on, but the next thing I know, a hand slapped against the window and slowly dragged down. It was terrifying. And I tried for a split second to convince myself that it was my brother, but the hand was so big, it was obviously like a grown man. And my brother was only about 15 at the time, so I knew it wasn't him. Now, thankfully, after the hand dragged off the bottom of the window, the front door opened and it was my mom. So I did what any kid would do. I run to her and I tell her there was a man in my window. I don't know if he was trying to come in or what, but I was scared. And you know what this lady had the nerve to tell me? Boy, go lay down. It was probably just a crackhead. What?